when I was growing up, we had Atari, so it's so simple, you know. Now I'll watch some of the games my boys play, and I'm like really like blown away. This is really cool.
A lot of the academic theory is really around the isolation and the loneliness piece. But I think what we see is anger, the slam doors, the refusal to come down, the refusal to speak or engage with a parent.
If your child sees you as compassionate, curious, non-judgmental, they'll come to you with the things that also matter later on in life.
Dalanna Burris is a licensed professional counselor with nearly 20 years of experience as behavioral addiction specialist for both inpatient and outpatient programs, notably Men and Jury here in Texas. She has a special expertise in problematic sexual behavior and other vices people find themselves in the thick of. She's EMDR certified, which she uses on a fairly regular basis, and throughout her professional career has honed her skills around tackling various mental health hurdles. I'm really excited that she's joining us today because she really understands the world of what we call the trifecta in adolescent and young men, which would be gaming, pornography, and cannabis. So what struck me was her expertise in sex addiction, particularly as so many parents are really trying to wrap our heads around this kind of new landscape of OnlyFans and pornography being so early. Like people are, I think the average age for porn access is like 12. Yeah. So, you know, it's a real topic in parenting right now. And of course, it's so awkward for parents. Whether you were raised conservatively or in a traditional household, or even if, you know, you're accepting of all of the things, it's still just an awkward subject. So I'm really glad to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
You are an advocate for addiction treatment, and we met at the NADAC conference. How was that for you?
Well, so I work in the field of addiction because I grew up with a younger brother who had issues with substances, and I didn't really understand what was going on. And so actually this year, 2025, it'll be 19 years that I've worked in the field. And when my brother was having so many issues with substance, really, really addiction beginning very early, there wasn't a lot of resources.
Right.
You know? And so I started working in the field, and then I connected with professionals, and then I began to see how we can do more than just treat people in our office or at the facility we work at. We can actually make changes at a legislative level. And so I started working going to Hill Day with NADAC. We go up to Capitol Hill. I started kind of conversing back and forth with the Public Policy Committee, and then started working on the state board of the Texas Association of Addiction Professionals, which is the NADAC chapter here. And then I'm the president-elect of the Houston chapter. So, you know, I just really getting that piece of my work going. I absolutely love it. It's nice to see change at a larger level than not only seeing change in my office. So
that's amazing. And I think we kind of were also thinking, you know, there's only so much you can do in a one-on-one setting. What can we do from like an education perspective, talking directly to young people? And then as we did that more and more with HealthyGamer, parents would reach out and say, like, what can I do? Well, they would reach out almost, I think most people seek treatment once the problem is so pronounced, they realize, okay, there's not much I can do about it now. I think our generation of parents is starting to be a little bit more proactive on like, what do I teach them? What are the techniques? Kind of like, do I speak more softly? Like, what are these things that maybe our parents didn't know or learned the hard way that we can kind of do a little bit easier? So can you tell us a little bit about like the typical kind of client that you work with, just so we get an idea of your expertise and background?
Sure. The people that I end up working with are referrals from the psychiatrists in the hospital that I work at, either in an inpatient or outpatient setting where there's been a behavior that's become compulsive in nature. I don't really enjoy using the term addiction because there's a lot of like negative stereotype with it, right? But it's a behavior that has gotten to a place to where it's disrupting their life. And so initially, I started working in gambling disorder because gambling is the one diagnosis that's in the DSM. And then I added in excessive technology use, and along with that, gaming disorder. And then I'm a certified sex addiction therapist. My PhD studies is in clinical sexology. And so I started working with problematic sexual behavior. So the typical client that will come in my office or be referred to me can be as young as 7 or 8.
Wow.
And then I've had people that are in their 70s work with me.
If we think about like a 15-year-old boy coming in, what are the things that you're most likely to see?
Sure. Most of the teenage boys that I see are angry. That's the first thing. I'll notice there's some anger going on. They isolate. Quite often they have more online friends than face-to-face friends. History of bullying is a big one. They have quite a bit of anxiety. Because of the population I treat, there are, elevated mental health issues. So high levels of depression. And then there's usually disruption in the family system. There's quite often one parent's not as engaged, or there's conflict between the parents. But the main thing that I will see quite over and over with the 15-year-old boys is they have learned the skill to numb out and escape the reality that's going on. And usually it's gaming.
So interesting, because I think we see very similar. For every person that's coming in and is very depressed or really maybe has not active suicidal ideation, but has maybe thought about it and is like past that point and just still not in a great space. For every person like that we see somebody that's saying gaming saved my life. I was so unhappy at home. These friendships are what saved me. So it's a really kind of nebulous space, I think, for parents where they don't know if is this hurting them or is this helping them?
Right. And if you ask from the adolescent's perspective, they will tell you, look, no one understood me. No one got me except my gaming community. And then if you ask the parents will have the different perspective. Well, he's anxious because all he does is stay in his room and isolate and game. And the reason why he is angry is because he's maybe communicating with people that he games with that have these kind of like thought processes also that they share.
The echo chamber. Yeah.
Being unhappy in their world, lack of purpose, feeling not heard or seen. And so you're right. It's the important thing about when I do approach my patients is to kind of see their perspective. Like, I really am curious as to what they think is going on. It's helpful to hear the parent's perspective for sure, to keep that in mind. But a lot of times these kids, they do not feel like their parents understand them. And so parents are going to come in with their own ideas of what's going on. But it is helpful to kind of, sit with the kid and I say kid, the adolescent, the young man, to understand, what they're getting out of gaming or what they're getting out of, the behaviors that parents may see as problematic.
How often do you think the parents are accurately assessing what's going on?
I think both can be true.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the skills that we do teach at Vinegar is dialectical behavior therapy, where two opposing beliefs can be true at the same time. And so a lot of times it's not about who's right or wrong, but it's more about, understanding the situation that's going on and how can we make it better.
Right. So parental instincts, for the most part, pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's our experience as well. Even if they're not on the same page, the parent and the young man, for what is going on, the parent's instinct that something is going on is typically
it's right on
spot
target.
on. Yeah. You mentioned anger, which I think is a really interesting perspective. A lot of the academic theory is really around the isolation and the loneliness piece.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we see
Is anger.
The slam doors, the refusal to come down, the refusal to speak or engage with a parent.
The rage gaming.
Yes.
Holes in the walls. Disrespect towards parents and siblings.
What is normal anger and what is anger that your alarm bell should go off?
Right. So I think this is one of the most important emotions that we have.
Yeah.
Anger is the message from our body to our brain saying something's not right. I need space. Someone violated my boundaries. Something needs to change. Anger helps us do social reform, right? Anger allows us to walk away from situations that aren't healthy for us. With the young adults that I'm working with, they haven't learned how to interpret the anger that they're feeling and process it effectively. Because quite frankly, their parents didn't teach them how to do this because their parents were told, don't be angry when they were younger. So it's almost like this generational, systemic kind of misunderstanding of the emotion. So normal anger. You know what? Something doesn't feel good and I want someone to get away from me. Okay. Anger allows us to set healthy boundaries. Anger allows us to right a wrong. Anger allows us to find our voice. Unhealthy anger turning into physical violence, the punching of the walls. Sometimes screaming is okay. I mean, I felt really good sometimes when I've gone on my jog with my dog and I just will let out whatever I need to while I'm running. To feel the emotion is one thing, but to process it effectively is another. So purpose of anger, being able to kind of figure out what it is that I don't want near me. What is it that I don't feel is right? Quite often, most of the kids that come in my office, they've broken a TV or they end up using like foul language for every other word. Mm-hmm. I've had people come into my office that have harmed their pets out of anger. You know, the uncontrollable outbursts and behaviors. That's unhealthy. Yeah.
You touched on so many, I think, really important pieces. I think the generational divide is really interesting because, you know, different cultures and different, like, I guess, households have different styles around anger. I came from a house that, like, if you were angry, you yelled and it was over. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my good friends came from don't be angry households. And the music they listen to is like the angry kind of music. It's a lot of like inward private anger. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to see. So I wonder what to look for in that situation.
Well, you hit on a great one, music. That's one of the first questions I ask the kids that I work with. Who's your favorite artist? That gives me so much insight. Because you're right, like a lot of, I'll just go straight to rap. A lot of rap, at least in my generation, had angry undertones in it. I'm Gen X and we were taught, don't be angry. Go to your room if you're angry. Don't talk back. And, you know, those all have their places.
Go for a walk, like walk it off, yeah.
Yeah. And instead of processing it in the moment when you feel it, simply saying, I feel angry about this, can allow you to almost like flip a switch in your brain, like, aha, I understand what I'm experiencing, and then you can process it. Stuffing it down through a lot of the skills that we learned when Gen X was younger, like, you know, back to mine, don't be angry. Mm-hmm. You know, just kind of stuff down the anger. And then eventually emotions surface. We have to process them. And that's where you're going to see a lot of these kids raging. The emotions that they felt, the anger that they felt, they've stuffed down from whatever experience they've had. And eventually it comes out. And a lot of times whenever I'll work with an adolescent, particularly male more than females, who have experienced a lot of raging, dad's not around, or mom's working a lot, or I'm alone, I don't have any friends at school, or, they're angry about something. But instead of processing it, identifying it, talking about it with someone, doing something constructive where they feel they have some sort of power, and the power will come out in a lot of really destructive behaviors.
You're mentioning a lot of the processing and the skills gap around anger. For a parent that is noticing isolation, some holes in the wall, those behaviors, what are the skills that the parent should have? And then what are the skills that they can teach to the kid?
Yeah. So the one thing that I'll work with parents on whenever the kids are raging is behavior intervention. So look, if you're going to punch a hole in the wall, we're not going to game. So there's a direct consequence. And a lot of times the parents will be like, well, I can't tell him he's not going to game. Okay, well, let's give him something else. Let's give him something else to do. And the impulse to punch something. Okay, how would it feel for him when he has that impulse to punch something to walk away from the game, to disrupt that cycle? Because a lot of the behaviors are just learned behaviors. What can we do instead? So I will do a lot of one-on-one work with the kid. Look, mom said you punched a hole in the wall. What do you think you could do different? And they'll usually come up with a lot of solutions. So I would suggest parents help them fix the wall. My kids thankfully have never punched a hole in the wall. But I encourage parents, teach them how to fix the wall. There's a consequence to punching a hole in the wall. Okay, teach them how to fix it. And then ask them, okay, I understand that you got really, overstimulated while you were gaming. It's not going to work. What can we do instead? And it kind of gives the child a little bit of control, which anger is saying, I don't have any control. I'm really frustrated. And that intervention alone of the consequence, fixing the wall, we're not going to game if you punch the wall again. What can we do instead? So you have you're giving the kid a lot of say, a lot of autonomy. And it's usually quite helpful just starting there.
I agree. I think it's really interesting when we listen to kids' own assessment of what the trigger was and what they think an appropriate consequence is. Because a lot of times they're harsher on themselves than the parent would be. Mm-hmm. They'll kind of be like, oh, I'm grounded for a week. And you're like, fix the wall.
That's it.
Yeah.
But having the real, parents often just fix the wall or have it fixed or don't have it fixed and leave it there. That's shame provoking. I will say fix the wall. But having the kid fix the wall is kind of cool because they actually learn how to take care of a situation that they created. And so that's, I think, one of the mistakes that parents do. They just kind of take care of it, buy a new TV if they broke a TV, buy a new remote if they, or whatever they broke. Actually have them earn a new TV. Mm-hmm. Have them fix the wall. And then ask them, okay, what do you think your consequence should be? Because actions do have consequences. And as parents, we try to mitigate a lot of the consequences. And at the end, that kind of harms our kids. Consequences are nature's way of having us correct our behavior, right? And it's a safe environment, usually in the parent's home, to learn the consequence.
That is really fascinating. And I think it's also so aligned with what I see on a day-to-day basis with the HealthyGamer community, but also what the everyday conversations parents are having with their kids, where there's so much surprise that the kid is harder on themselves a lot of time than the parents want to be on them.
Yeah.
And what the kid wants from the parents is often less than what the parent thinks that they're wanting from them.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that they want a new TV. It's that they want a friend or they want, I don't know, some quality time with a family member that they don't get to see anymore for whatever reason. You mentioned numbing.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm kind of wanting to go through, like, almost step by step, what is happening in that kid's brain when they're trying to numb themselves, they're escaping, and then there's rage, and then there's a hole in the wall, right? Like, can you walk me through what exactly is going on?
So quite often when I'm working with, I'll just say particularly adolescent boys, since we're going in that direction, they don't want to be bored. That's like your biggest thing. I'm bored. And so kids don't understand the purpose of boredom, and it's okay if they don't understand it. We can get some education around it. But you know what? Boredom feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? That's just kind of the way it is. And the ability to tolerate boredom is so minimal in our adolescent men young men, because when they were young, we have a generation of kids that grew up with an iPad in front of them.
Right.
So, they can't be bored. They're constantly stimulated, right? That's a whole nother conversation, probably.
Yeah, we should have it, I think. Yeah.
So there's this need to no longer feel boredom. And numbing is kind of a way to kind of not feel the bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily to feel awesome. It's just to kind of like push away the bad feeling of boredom. And so what I'll see is kids will, oh yeah, I want a game. And then it gets to a point to where they're just there gaming. That's the numbing piece. It's no longer like the excitement maybe that they encounter when they first start playing the game. But this is kind of like I don't want to feel bored. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. So I'm just going to game.
There's that peak of excitement, and then now they're downhill, and
Right.
It's just, there's no fun. There's no joy in it anymore. And a lot of times when you ask them, like, are you even having fun anymore? That's when you get like, no, it sucks. And you get a lot of the rage.
Yeah. And especially I'll see these young men go back to games where they were bullied. If you've ever read any of the Call of Duty threads, which I actually encourage parents to read some of them, the message boards on Call of Duty, they're quite abusive. And so it's almost in your mind, there's this kind of thought of like, why is my kid so engaged in this? Well, there's a feeling like I don't have nothing else to do. I don't want to feel bored. So I escape that feeling of boredom, not really engaging. I'm not really enjoying, engaging in the game, but at least I'm not bored.
Call of Duty is interesting because there's definitely like the toxic side.
Mm-hmm.
And what brings kids, what we always kind of tell parents about games is look at the need that it's filling.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a competitive need, a creative need, a social need? Like, what's going on there? Call of Duty is interesting because it's skills. So there's that kind of almost, it's not like football, but like the kind of trash talk and like sports culture.
Yeah.
There's the camaraderie, there's the leadership skills development. So I think what's fun about it is being really good at something, having like the skill or being a great leader or having a great set of friends around it. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is the toxic side.
Yeah. Well, I think in every single game that I've ever worked with a kid on, from Roblox to Call of Duty,
right.
There's the beneficial piece, and then there's also that toxic side. And I think this is where us as parents and even clinicians can step back and say, okay, how is this meeting their needs, and is it problematic?
Right.
I think people get really stuck on, is this a gaming addiction? Is this a technology addiction? And I'm like, does it matter? Like, if it's not working for the kid, then let's make some changes. If it is filling a need, however, it's becoming intrusive in the other areas of their life, how can we do this in real life? Laser tag is so much fun with my boys. When they got really heavily into like wanting to game Call of Duty, I would integrate in like laser tag a couple times a month that we would go do, or paintball, things like that. And you know what? They loved it. And it checked a lot of those boxes that Call of Duty was checking for them. And then they were with their friends or their siblings, and they were with their mom. So, you know, as a single parent, limited time with my kids between work and all my other things. But when I'm there with them, it was like they just glowed. And so it's that, you know, that maybe some of the things that, you know, kids that I work with will come up with is I don't ever see my parents, or my parents are always fighting. They're always working, or this or that. Sometimes just being there with them too can check a box that Call of Duty won't check.
I think getting outside of the house too.
It's another one.
Yeah. It's, I love the laser tag example.
Mm-hmm.
The way my kids game is they love like the exploration and the adventure piece. So a lot of our stuff is like, okay, we're going to go on an adventure. And even if it's just some park, and they find some weird looking tree, then that's like
so
the
cool.
coolest tree in the world right now. But seeing what they're craving, the competitive or whatever, and being able to join that world. How old were your kids when you were doing that?
Let's see. I noticed that they were asking to game too much around 12 or 13.
12 or 13. Yeah, I think that's a great like early.
And I was like, okay. And have you ever done geocaching?
No.
Oh, it's so much fun. So yeah, so you go and you find these, I don't know, these tubular pieces that are hidden throughout the United States, and you're given coordinates to find them, and you can go to different areas of the United States and find it. And then you just, like, we would sign our name and what time we found the geocation, and you check in on the app. That's kind of the adventure piece.
Like a Pokemon Go kind of thing. Yeah.
Pokemon Go is that's another balance of the good and healthy behavior versus the, can this be a little bit too much behavior?
Yeah.
But it gets them outside.
Yeah. And sometimes it's a phase and they grow out of it. And sometimes, and you never quite know which one is which until sometimes you're really deep in it.
That one's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's has quite a population of followers.
I'll have to check it out. I think my kids would be interested in it. Okay, so you were talking about numbing, and one of the things that we educate the Healthy Gamer community on quite a bit is alexithymia. So just like that numbness to emotions, right? Where the default answer is a lot of times, I'm frustrated. And there's not that emotional vocabulary around like, well, you're disappointed or you're angry. It's that emotions wheel kind of education.
Yeah.
And you were talking a little bit about identifying the emotion and then processing it and then kind of going from there. How can parents work on this alexithymic kind of problem?
So this is actually something that's pretty consistent that I've been working with from, I'm going to say 8, 9, 10 into early 20s, is this complete disconnect, if you will, from emotional experience. And a lot of people come in and I'm like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they're like, I don't know. Tell me about yourself. I don't know. So if you don't experience emotion, it's really hard to identify who you are and what makes me tick and my, my sense of who I am, my sense of self, right? So when I work with people who don't have that connection with their emotion, I pull out the feelings wheel, but another helpful tool is what's going on in your body? Like, where do you feel like maybe some extra blood flow? And there was this really cool study done in, I think it's 2017, on how your body feels emotions and where there's increased arousal, increased blood flow. And they had 11 different emotions, and it went over like 8 different countries. And consistently, people felt happiness the same way. People felt anxiety the same way. People felt anger the same way in their bodies. So our bodies go places long before our brain does. And so being able to like reconnect with what's going on in our body, that can really help understand the emotion and experience. So I'll give you an example. When I first started working in the field, I remember reading about how to interpret your child's, like their language. One of the things that kids constantly say was, my tummy's upset.
Yes.
And I remember I was 19 when I had my first, and I like wanted to know everything about my kids, did the baby sign language, did everything I could do to really understand my children. And I wanted to understand what was their language. When a child says, my tummy is upset, as an adult, we would think, okay, well, you ate something, right? Or maybe, you're just not feeling great today. Maybe you have a virus. However, a child, when they say my tummy is upset, one of the most beneficial questions to ask them is, tell me about how your day was. How are your friends doing? How's school going? Because a lot of the emotion that we feel in our stomach, feeling upset, could be related to anxiety. Because the experience of anxiety is that heightened emotion in certain areas of our body, like our stomach. And most of the time, if a child is telling you their tummy is upset, they're anxious about something. So being able to like really interpret kind of the language that we put to the experiences in our body.
And that starts early too, so elementary school. Yeah.
So early. Yeah. When I work with kids and they tell me, like, for example, when they are angry about something, my head hurts. Well, to me, that comes across as this, maybe he's experienced elevated stress. He doesn't know what he's doing. And, something's going on in his life he can't figure out a solution for. I think parents just asking, like, what's going on in your body? Like, what are you feeling in your body? That could be a first start in understanding the emotion they're experiencing. Sadness is experienced a certain way in our body. Disgust. There's just so many different emotions that we're experiencing that our bodies will tell us.
That fatigue doesn't get out of bed. That tells you something.
Exactly. That's depression, right? And in that experiment, the research I told you about, there is a lack, like this decrease of blood flow in the extremities. And if you think about it, when you're depressed and sad, you don't have energy. You can even feel cold. You want to get under the covers and curl up. That's your body telling you, I'm sad and depressed.
I think it's really helpful for that, something's going on, but you don't know what's going on, and kind of tuning into the body and the like biological signals that you're getting. It's really smart, and it's really powerful because you can talk about it when you're not in the heat of the moment, right? You can kind of talk about the day when you're hearing about the tummy's upset. My sister actually, whenever we would visit home from college, and right before we would get in the car to drive back, my mom would look at her and she's like, her tummy's upset. And she knew something was going on. And I think it's so interesting because we're talking about adolescent boys, but really it's kind of like almost like 15 to 20, right? Like even that early college age where there isn't that emotional awareness skill yet. There's a lot of numbing. And that transition is so difficult. When you don't have that strong sense of purpose, you don't know what you want to be when you grow up. So you don't go into college thinking, I'm really excited about this and I'm going to kind of work hard in school and try to get where you're going. They're just going through the motions. And there's such a lack of what's next and what's my purpose here that you get some of these kind of toxic cycles.
That numbing creates space for a lot of really problematic thinking patterns too. because you're pushing away your own emotional experience. And it's really opening you up to a lot of influence from whatever you come across too. This is where I will see a lot of people who are gaming and they come across with different thoughts that parents are like, why are they behaving this way towards me? Or why did they say that to their brother or their sister? Or why are they watching pornography so much? It kind of opens up the gap for opens up their life for a lot of other maybe behaviors or, encounters maybe that they wouldn't have normally engaged in.
I think that's one of the hardest things for parents to see. Like a hole in the wall is one thing, but when they are thinking and like you don't have that influence, you don't have that way to converse with them anymore. Yeah. And you just know that when they're logging on, they're getting more of whatever that influence is. How do you reconnect from that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the first step that is important for parents to remember is to be curious. This is a time that kids are going to, experiment and try different things. And that's part of healthy development, right? The part of being an adolescent that's so awesome is that you have a limited fear. You're out and you think sometimes you can do anything. And, that's there for an evolutionary purpose. Just really understanding that curiosity will be the most helpful tool with parents. You go in with judgment and it will shut your child down. They will disconnect from you even more. And so I have a lot of conversations that I did not agree with my children at all when they were that age. And now they're in their 20s and I'm like, thankfully, I gave them the space to kind of figure out maybe a little bit on their own, not completely, but a little bit on their own so that they heard me when they needed to hear me.
It's nice also, I think, for a lot of parents who it is a years-long process, right? A lot of times we're thinking like, okay, it's been 2 weeks. Like, why are we still here? Give us a sense of in your experience, what is the timeline on this?
So I'll give you from personal and then professional. So personal experience, my boys started, gaming pretty young. I didn't see it as anything that was problematic. I thought my kids, this is good for them to have social connection. I was of the generation that didn't want my kids outside in the front yard because someone would take them so they could play in the backyard or they could play inside. And of course, as a working parent, I was very limited too on the times outside. So, my kids gamed pretty early. I put limits on it. And then when they were 12, 13, they gamed even more. And then I saw it as problematic, probably about 13, about that time. And for me, it was a lot of reminding them of the rules of the house, reminding there are consequences, and having them earn time was so powerful for them. And then also having free time. Look, you have this to do whatever you want. This is, your space. You can stay up till 2. I didn't want them up after 2, but you can game late, if you want to on, Saturday night. But you're still going to get up in the morning when we get up at 8. So, have fun with that, but, giving them the ability to make some choices. I'm going to say a good 10 years. It's a decade. It's a decade long. It really is. And, letting them learn from consequences was hard, but it was helpful.
Yeah, I think this is something that I'm learning as a parent myself, where it's not that hard to be a good parent, but it takes an extraordinary amount of energy and effort and thought to be a great parent. And that we don't always have that energy. Yeah. So that's a kind of a parent's personal journey, right? Where it's you gotta kind of dig deep, do what you do, self-care to Make sure you have that energy. And especially because with the consequences being so important, the consistency is like really the key there, right? Mm-hmm. And so many times parents, including me, are just like, I don't have the energy for this, whatever. I'll give you this one. And the one turns into 2, turns into 5.
Well, and know that as parents, we're not perfect either, right? And having compassion towards ourselves. Look, I did the best I could.
Yep.
And that can be helpful too.
And I found kind of those early conversations with kids about like, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. What are you trying to do? Mm-hmm. And those conversations about what's a fair consequence, because I don't want to sit here and yell at you for 10 minutes. Like that's not fun for me.
And all it will do is create distance between you and them either. Also, you know, at least emotional distance. So, yeah.
Definitely. Okay. So you have touched on porn a couple of times, and I know this is a huge, tricky landscape for parents, especially as pornography access is coming so early. Give us some sense of, especially as a sex therapist.
Well, okay. So this generation of children, they're seeing porn very early. Their brain is not ready for it. Their bodies are not ready for it. It can actually be traumatizing because they haven't had the hormonal shift into adolescence, which would understand that the material that they're looking at is sexual. Instead, it becomes very scary and traumatic. There's that set of issue. But what I'm seeing quite often is there is an increase in access. There is, of course, well, in this field, we look at access, affordability, and anonymity. Those 3 things are going on. Kids have access. If it's not their phone, their devices, it's their friends. It's free. And then now Texas has a law now where you're supposed to identify that you're over 18 on a lot of sites, but you can, according to a 13-year-old I worked with a couple weeks ago, his VPN is not in Texas. And so he was able to access pornography using his VPN that he downloaded for free. So really, you have complete anonymity. There we go. Anonymity. No one knows what you're looking at, you know? And so these are huge challenges, not only for clinicians and parents, but for kids too. Because at this stage in adolescence, remember, they're experimenting, they're testing boundaries. And so pornography has become a big issue. It has. And for parents, they kind of don't know how to talk about it.
Yeah, I think for the men and boys we see in like their early 20s, it's destroying their lives.
Yeah. It's destroying relationships. It's creating isolation. As an adolescent male, it's already awkward. A lot of changes are happening. If you think back, even as females, the most awkward time in our life was, you know, adolescence. So it's very challenging. And so the thought of being rejected is real. However, you're not rejected when you're looking at porn. You can see what you want to see, you can access what you want to access, and you get at least some level of sexual gratification without the fear of rejection.
That's interesting. One of the markers that I think there were some studies that were looking at porn addiction, and the highest indicator was lack of purpose around pornography, which ties very closely with some of the excessive gaming. So the 2 can often go hand in hand. Is that what you see as well?
It is. And then what we're seeing also is the addition of cannabis.
Yes, the trifecta.
This is the trifecta. This is you are gaming. There's a lack of purpose. Sure, there's the numbing piece. And I can look at porn while I'm gaming. I have constant arousal. And then I can numb out even a little bit more and feel more of a high if I add in cannabis. very, very difficult to treat.
It feels very hopeless for the caretaker, like the parents, the cousins, even people on our staff are like, I have a nephew, I have a little brother, and I'm so worried about that. Like, nobody can get through to them. Is the answer to pull them into a therapist's office, or is the answer something else that people can do at home?
Well, of course, as a therapist, I will tell you, yes, pull them into a therapist's office. Adolescents they do need to build very strong rapport with the therapist, and we learn how to build rapport with adolescents. That's an option. It's probably one of the better options. I do prefer, if that's going on, that there is also a restriction, whether it be an outpatient group or an inpatient setting, because when it gets to the level of cannabis integrated with porn, integrated with gaming, that is a very difficult cycle to treat in just at a home setting.
Yeah, it really feels like as long as they're in that room with these circumstances, this is the pattern.
Right. So you have to break it. And thoughts around that is, look, why would you stay in a situation where there is triggers? The brain takes in millions of pieces of information at every second. So it understands that this room is a trigger. When I'm in this room, I smoke pot. When I see these gray walls, then I look at porn. When I see that light over there in the corner, then this is the room where I can game, smoke pot, and watch porn. So immediately when I come into this room, guess what my brain goes to, right? And so the thought that, okay, my 15-year-old son, 16-year-old son will have the capacity to deal with that at home, it's in my mind, it's not clinically possible. There needs to be some sort of intervention. And so, if that's not possible, if the therapist's office isn't possible, or maybe the family is not like really on board with therapy, if outpatient service isn't possible, if inpatient service isn't possible, there needs to be at the very least, a change of behavioral patterns and a change of environment. That's really the first step.
I agree. I think the home environment is really interesting to look at, because one of the things that we tell parents is put the PCs in the public spaces, get it out of the bedrooms. Usually it's not, if we're talking about clinical intervention, because there are concurrent process and substance addictions like that, I agree 100%. It needs a clinical intervention. It's a clinical problem. There are, I think, some we talked about like that 12 to 13-year-old kind of like, okay, this could go one of two ways, right? And I think that's when like really paying attention to the home environment around like where the devices are, what the access rules are, things like that. But then cannabis in the mix at that age, it's scary because it's so, the culture and the messaging around it, it's so
dangerous.
Casual. Yeah.
It is so dangerous for the adolescent brain. And I do believe that the government's going to do a little bit more education to our young people with the ability now to do some research around cannabis. It is so dangerous to the adolescent brain. And working in the field now for almost 2 decades, been able to see how, alcohol, nicotine used to be the first trial substances. And now we're seeing the cannabis is now, more often the first trial substance for young people. You add cannabis in and it becomes very dangerous. There is not one child I've ever worked with, one adolescent I've ever worked with where I've said, okay, I get it. It's a harm reduction thing. No, cannabis is very dangerous, even in very small doses, to adolescents. And, I get they're going to experiment, they're going to try, but it is very important that parents are able to give that very strong approach to cannabis, the topic of cannabis to our kids, period.
What do you think parents should know about cannabis?
Well, so especially if there's a family history of serious mental illness like psychosis, cannabis can unravel a lot of the elements in our brain associated with psychosis, the experience of psychosis. If you have someone in your family history who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, anything on the psychotic spectrum, it is more likely to experience psychosis if there's a cannabis use involved. The other things too, cannabis use causes isolation. Mm-hmm. It's interesting when I hear kids talk about, well, it's the drug that helps me like hang out with my friends and it's really social. And I validate that. I totally get it. Cannabis use works until it doesn't. Mm-hmm. It gets you into the cycle of anxiety where maybe you have some social anxiety, you smoke weed with your friends and you feel less anxiety. Well, what happens is you don't deal with what's the underlying social anxiety piece. Instead, you mask it with cannabis. And then that anxiety just continues to grow and grow and grow. You need more cannabis to overcome it. And you get into this cycle to where you're anxious if you don't have weed. Mm-hmm. The other piece is too, it really impacts the development of the brain. There's a really very, very cool experience that happens when we're an adolescent into young adulthood called pruning, where our brain really holds on to the things that are important, kind of like lets go the things that are not. And cannabis impacts that process as well. Attention span. It's not a helpful substance.
One of the things that Oleg always cautions people on is, especially as your brain is forming with cannabis, it really impairs your ability to feel fun and pleasure when you're older. And then your whole adulthood is compromised.
Impacted.
Yeah.
Right. Such an important, phase from about 12 or 13 into the early 20s. And for men, even to the late 20s, their brain is continuing to form. Mm-hmm. So there's a time and place for some people for cannabis use. I'm not anti-cannabis use for adults in certain settings, just like I'm not anti-alcohol for certain people in certain settings. But I definitely feel as if there's no benefit to an adolescent in using cannabis.
Yeah, especially with that anxiety loop and then the isolation loop. Yeah. Well, can you tell us maybe some like silver linings, some glimmers of hope? Like what should a parent look at and see like, oh, this is a win, and how do you run with that?
Yeah. So I will tell you that I don't look at gaming as all bad. I think it's a really cool experience. When I was growing up, we had Atari, so it's so simple, Now I'll watch some of the games my boys play, and I'm like really like blown away. This is really cool. And they're able to play with kids in Denmark, and they're able to like have all these fun experiences that they will never have outside of that game. Mm-hmm. So it really can build the element of fantasy. It can enhance some social skills, right? And this is where I really work with kids on balance. Like, you know what? I'm not telling you not to game. Now, some kids, we start with cessation, but the majority of people I work with is like, okay, how is this working for you?
Yeah.
Are you able to like get your school done? Are you sleeping well? Are you eating away from the screen? Because kids like to just eat in front of the screen. Are you keeping up your hygiene? If we can check those boxes, have fun. Game. It's cool, right? And I did see my boys, they're 15 months apart, really connect while they were gaming together.
Yes.
To this day, they game together. They're 25 and 25 and 24. And They get on Friday nights. I would rather them game with each other than do other things, right?
Yeah.
And, I see the bonding, the camaraderie. I love it. Everything in balance, right? And as parents, isn't that one of our roles, is to teach our kids balance?
Totally.
And so silver linings, hey, if you can understand what's going on with your child, if there is some problematic issues, you're going to be closer to your child. They will have felt seen and heard, and there will be a very strong connection if you take the time to kind of really understand what's going on. The other thing too, if your child sees you as compassionate, curious, non-judgmental, they'll come to you with the things that also matter later on in life. I have very good relationships with my boys. I set very specific limits on gaming. They didn't like me sometimes. However, I was able to see that once we set consistent limits, they were able to follow it. Kids want that direction from their parents.
Yeah. I think they know when the parent is afraid of the fight too, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite things is my kids are younger, but it's been cool to kind of follow them into their world where the sibling dynamic, as you said, like it's really great for their friendship as sisters. They play differently. And one of them is more exploratory, creative. But when I watch her, she doesn't know she's hungry. She doesn't know she needs to go to the bathroom. Like everything is just off.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like she's a little bit more vulnerable to screens in that way, games, whatever it is. And the other one, she can easily like divert her attention, pay attention to what you're saying, go back. She'll pause, go to the bathroom, whatever, So just between two individual kids, you see such a variable in who's more vulnerable, who can kind of keep their head on their shoulders.
Yeah.
Do you see variability as well?
For sure. Definitely. I have my 15-year-old, the fifth out of the six. She really likes Fortnite.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll hear her play Fortnite. She games very differently than the boys did. And you're right, just listening to kind of the way that they express themselves too in the game gives you some insight into them. I think that if we listen and if we look, we'll see a side to our kids that maybe they haven't shown us before too.
Right.
Or maybe they don't even know it's there.
And then being accepting of, hey, you haven't shown me this side, but I love this side of you is also really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
This is a Reddit post, and it's called "Parents Who Get Mad at Their Adult Children for Sex or Jacking Off Are So Funny." My friend was telling me her mom got into a shouting match with her because she went through her stuff without permission and found her vibrator. My friend is 19. She's in college. She has a job. She lives on her own. Her mom was saying she has no future because she masturbates more than she studies. WTF.
Agreed. No. No. Why is mom going through her stuff?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, why do moms ever go through your stuff, right?
So she doesn't live at home?
Doesn't sound like it.
Okay. Well, I think that there is some issues there with mom's sexuality and maybe mom's relationship with her own body.
So, teen kid in this one.
Teen
right?
kid.
All right, cool. This person is wondering, are my parents strict? I'm 16, male, and my mom is 40-something, and my dad is 55. No phones allowed in room. 1 hour of screen time per weekday and 2 hours total Sunday and Monday together. Absolutely no girls, no fast food ever. My Netflix profile is age locked, so I can't watch titles aged 15 and over. My internet usage is monitored from the second I start to the second I finish. My phone is tracked when I'm out of the house. After school, come straight home. The tracking enforces this. No allowance whatsoever, not even for food. If I want to go out with friends, I have to tell my parents exactly what we are doing. I can only go out with friends my parents know and like, and my parents must communicate with my friends' parents before we go out. No TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, etc. No password allowed on phone, so my parents can check my phone easier. Phone is checked every night. If I want to watch YouTube, I can't watch YouTubers that curse. Are my parents strict?
Yes.
Okay.
He's going to do it anyways.
Yeah. Edit. Posted this on the toilet. I cannot move out until I am married. My Reddit is disguised as a dictionary app on my phone.
He's going to do things anyways, right?
Yeah.
So, and you'll probably engage in some really unsafe behavior. What's so interesting is whenever kids aren't able to talk to their parents, they often engage in behaviors that are a little bit more risky than had they been able to talk to their parents about their behaviors.
Yeah, especially this kid is a 16-year-old boy. When he goes to college,
oh, he's going to go crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he has what he's been taught is pure restriction, not balance.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, teen kid once again. What to cover in a porn talk with young teenager. Learned today my 14-year-old son has successfully bypassed all the content restrictions on his electronic devices and has been viewing pornography for a while. Pretty impressive feat given my spouse works in IT and we were pretty confident we had it locked down. We are waiting for this weekend to have a talk with him about it. I am less concerned with him viewing pornography and more concerned about him having a distorted idea about sex and relationships. Admittedly, I had started viewing pornography at a much younger age than he is now, and I know from my own experience that it can cause its own set of problems. We believe in sex positivity and don't want to shame or embarrass him, but we don't want to ignore this either. I figure that other Reddit parents have gone down this road, so I would like to hear what has and hasn't worked well and what things we should make sure to discuss.
Wow. Well, first of all, I do agree that kid is amazing. Kids will look at porn. Like I said, if it's not their own devices, it's someone else's. So porn is accessible. Having the conversation would be helpful if kid heard from mom, look, I was here too. This happened in this situation. It didn't turn out well for me. And then meeting the kid where the kid's at, saying, look, I get it. I totally get it. You want to look at porn. This is our concern around porn. And then I think it would be helpful if parents ask the child, what's driving you to want to look at this? What do you think is going on here? And then see let the child kind of give feedback on it. But it is really important for parents to not be seen as perfect and infallible. And it's helpful if parents share their experience appropriately with kids.
Is this a conversation for just dad to have with the son?
No.
I
would say that mom needs to be involved too. And the reason why I would encourage both parents to be there, or at least kid have the conversation with mom too, is because I think it's important for the son to see I have two parents that want to be there for me.
Mm-hmm.
And dad may have a different take than mom, but I think it's really helpful if both parents are in the home, that both parents are able to have a sex positive conversation with their child.
You mentioned that you had kind of a different perspective when you were a single mom. What is the single mom's guide to having this talk?
Yeah, so I will tell you the single mom's guide to having this talk is, first of all, have it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it may feel a little awkward, but I think allowing the kid also to kind of lead the conversation too. When I had conversations with my kids about sex, about porn, I asked them, hey, are there questions that you have about pornography? You have a phone. If you haven't seen it by now, I'm sure you have. or will very soon. You've seen it from your friends or elsewhere, it's appropriate for adults this is adult information, but kids have access to it. Are there questions that you have? What's been your reaction when you've seen things like this? Is it something that you've not been able to control as far as looking at? And approaching it more in a curious way, questioning their experience versus, what was the other one about porn?
The restriction and all that.
Yeah, you're nothing but a loser or something. I can't remember what the other one was. So I think that's important. The Single Mom's Guide is basically have it. It doesn't matter if you have boys and it's difficult. Have the conversation with you're the parent.
It's also it's striking me that so many of these posts are parents trying to control the tech, and every time they're getting outsmarted by their kid.
Yeah, because the kids know more than we do.
Yeah.
They grew up with this.
We always tell parents, if you get into a cyber war with your kids, you're going to lose.
You're going to
that's
lose.
Not the battle you want to pick your terrain.
I mean, anytime anything's ever messed up on my iPhone, I've asked my kid to fix it.
Okay, this one's a little different. Do you limit your teen's shower time? My 13-year-old son is taking 20 to 30-minute showers. Not sure if he's actually in the shower the whole time. Every morning before school. His stepdad has a major issue with this and wants to limit the time. I don't disagree that he could hurry it up a bit, but I don't know that it's a battle to fight. Less than 2 years ago, we had to fight to get him to shower at all because he literally stunk. Not sure what kind of message this will send. Stepdad mainly brings up how much it costs. By no means are we rich, but we're not struggling to pay the bills. Hubs and I were raised very different. He had super strict parents and that I did not at all, so we disagree on a lot of things and I'd love some other opinions. Edited to add, no one is waiting. We have 2 other showers. He's not late for school. He does not have a lock on his bedroom door. Old house, door needs to be updated, just haven't yet. Makes sense he wants some privacy.
Yeah, he's not just taking a shower. And so I would tell the mom the most helpful thing in this situation is not to shame, because it will come across as shaming, and not to worry about it right now. There's other things to worry about. And if it is something that time may be an issue, maybe we have a rule that phones don't go in the bathroom. And maybe we just keep that as a general rule.
I think it's a great rule for adults as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if he's in the tub doing what adolescent males do, it won't be as long if there's not a phone in there to keep stimulating.
Interesting. What about this dynamic between 2 parents? One had a strict household, one didn't. And now they can't find common ground.
I would say find common ground before approaching it with the kid. Yeah. So that brings up an issue that kids pick up on very quickly. If one parent thinks one way and another thinks a different. If it's a 2-parent household, it needs to be united. Parents need to compromise and get to a place to where it's united.
It's interesting that one's a step parent too. All right, this one.
Hey, have you seen my... Why you close the computer? What were you doing? You stuttering. Yeah, no, I'll take it. Let me see this. Shut that kind of fast. What's going on in here? Oh, you shut it down. Wow. All right. Are you in Safari? History. Is this something you need to tell me? You're supposed to be here doing homework. Are you doing these things?
I think that's the way a lot of parents find out, right? What's
Sure.
going on there?
Yeah. Well, so I would encourage the parent to work on communication around and behaviors around not shaming your child. So he knew what he was doing when he closed the computer, right? So this is where I think a lot of the parents that I work with forget they were kids. It was a different world when they were younger. However, some of the basic behaviors, we forget. Oh yeah, you know what? I did masturbate when I was 12, 13. I did find my neighbor's penthouse magazine, and when I was over there. We forget that period of time. And so, it is important for parents to remember that this is a natural progression into adulthood. And the last thing we want are individuals that are growing up from adolescent to adulthood who feel shamed and feel they can't talk to their parents about things. So I would encourage the dad to have not done that.
Okay. How do you play it differently?
Well, I have had this experience where I've walked in on my boys. However, that was the last time. I knocked after that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I walked away from it. And then I had a conversation with them later. Were you able to complete all of your homework? Because that's going to be the primary thing that I would like you to do in the evening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So walk away, talk about it later,
Mm-hmm.
and then emphasize this is stuff that you want this person to be spending their time on.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have to keep bringing it up.
No, because I will have made sure that the conversations around sex and masturbation and things like that aren't done in a shaming way.
Mm-hmm.
So your child is already ashamed that you saw them doing something that was very private, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I probably would add in a apology for walking in the room without knocking. Because what your child does in their private space is, sure, there are things that may be problematic, but for the most part, that's their private space, depending on the age. But it is very important for children to understand that they have privacy, they have boundaries. And so the flow I would encourage them to have had was, I apologize, I walked in. I should have knocked. Were you able to get done what you need to get done? Yes. And then I go back to it in a separate conversation. Hey, you know what? The other day when I walked in on you, I shouldn't have walked in on you, but I noticed you were having some private moments. So is there anything that you would like to talk to me about? I know we haven't really had a lot of conversation around pornography, around sexual behavior and things like that. Are there things that you'd like to talk to me about? Because looking at those things, it's pretty normal. It's not beneficial for you to do those things, and I'd prefer you not to. Or is there anything you want to ask me about that? I think where I'm seeing a lot of issues with parents is in the desire to keep our children so safe. We can go to the other extreme and shame them for behaviors that are quite natural.
Right. And that's learned parenting too, right? That's what our parents did. So that's like first instinct for us.
Yeah. And so I feel bad for the parent in that meme, and I feel bad for the child.
Yeah.
Because I think his response was definitely something that a lot of parents do.
Yeah.
And then the response to the child is not going to be very healthy, because they're going to think, oh no, I did something wrong and now I'm ashamed, and now I don't know if I want to do that.
I definitely am never going to talk to you about this again.
Ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any parting words for parents listening?
Well, I think one thing that I encourage parents to do is to not get too worked up in the details, and celebrate the wins. Because like you said earlier, some parents want it like fixed within 2 weeks, or, and the reality is screens aren't going anywhere. Gaming is not going anywhere. 1/3 of the world's population identifies as gamers.
Yeah.
So it's there. So how can we teach our kids to game in balance? And if you're able to kind of put some restrictions in place, yes, and approach. I know I brought up curiosity a lot, but just approach the situation with curiosity. I think it will definitely have a different effect with the kids.
I love all of that. I think it's so key because like we love gaming with our kids, and I agree that there's like a time and place for alcohol, cannabis, whatever. There's no need to vilify these things, but there is a real anger. There is a real like problem we have as a society with kids isolating and being really lonely, and paying attention to those things, and then how substances or technology kind of feeds into that, I think is really the key.
Agreed.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This I feel like we covered so much, and you're such a gem because you have your personal experience as a mom, and then also like 20 years of professional experience working through every facet of all of these issues. And I think you're right. Like it looks different now in 2025 than it did in 20 years ago, but same stuff, different presentation.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.